powerful personality dominated events of the late 60s like few presidents in our history. He was a master of politics and persuasion. His hopes for what he called the Great Society produced more new social programs than any president since FDR. By 1968, he would lose the nation's trust and support, but for a time he was more popular than most presidents. Lady Bird had a special charm. In the mid-60s, she traveled all over the country in her campaign to beautify America, dedicating parks and planting trees. Lady Bird was the First Lady. She was also Mrs. Johnson, and the President respected her opinion. Like Lady Bird, Johnson cared deeply about the causes that he championed. He was a man of great hope for justice and for peace. His hope for peace in these years was shared by Pope Paul VI. The Pope made an historic visit to the U.S. in October '65, part of a pilgrimage of peace. It was the first time any Pope had traveled to the Western Hemisphere. "No more war, never again," he said in addressing the United Nations. The Pope's celebration of the Mass for Peace at Yankee Stadium attracted thousands. It was more than an ecumenical gesture when the Pope met the Archbishop of Canterbury in '66. Both sought to heal divisions within the religious community. There were other church ceremonies in the news, like the wedding of Lucy Baines Johnson. White House receptions were often entertaining, like Johnson's welcome to a group of high school scholars in '67.
I've just lived through several years with teenage girls in this house, and hadn't affected me one bit. I've kept my cool. I haven't bugged out. I'm still in Fat City.
More than any president since Lincoln, Johnson championed the cause of equal rights for black Americans.
There is no Negro problem. There is no Southern problem. There is no Northern problem. There is only an American problem. It is the effort of American Negroes to secure for themselves the full blessings of American life. Their cause must be our cause too. Because it's not just Negroes, but really it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. And we shall overcome.
In the '60s, many black and white Americans joined in nonviolent protest of the widespread discrimination throughout the country. Sit-ins at northern lunch counters and marches through the South drew national attention. So had the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, who emerged as a symbol of the nonviolent movement. The confrontations were not always peaceful, and marchers were often met with police dogs, fire hoses, and sometimes even murder. Some blacks were impatient with nonviolent tactics, like Stokely Carmichael.
We will define black power. He will listen and recognize it. That's all. That's all. Yeah. So you ought not to be worried about their debates about violence. You ought to tell them clear. If you don't want any trouble, keep your filthy white hands off our beautiful black.
Despite the race riots of the late '60s, not everyone would accept the radical viewpoint. Martin Luther King still spoke to the hearts and minds of most Americans.
It seems that I can hear the God of history saying, that was not enough. But I was hungry, and ye fed me not. I was naked, and ye clothed me not. I was devoid of a decent sanitary house to live in, and ye provided no shelter for me, and consequently you cannot enter the kingdom of greatness. If ye do it unto the least of these, my brethren, ye do it unto me.
I say violence
Christian charity
is
seemed
necessary.
unrealistic to H. Rap
Violence is
Brown.
a part of America's culture. It is as American as cherry pie. American taught the black people to be violent. We will use that violence to rid ourselves of oppression if necessary. We will be free by any means necessary. And
The events of 1968 would cause us all to wonder who was right. But Martin Luther King stood resolute as he spoke that April in Memphis.
That we've got to give ourselves to this struggle until the end. Nothing would be more tragic than to stop at this point in Memphis. We've got to see it through. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Within hours, Martin Luther King was dead, assassinated. The outrage could not be contained. Fires burned the cities of America.
In his last sermon, Dr. King referred to himself as a drum major. With his death, the drums are louder still. We do not yet know whether they are a summons to battle or to the meeting of reconciliation and peace. That choice, it seems to me, is largely up to us. This generation did not create most of the conditions and the convictions which have led us to this day, but this generation has a responsibility to resolve them. Leaders can explain.
Robert Kennedy understood what it meant to lose a great leader. But within weeks, his voice of hope and reason was silenced too by an assassin's bullet. Despite our heartache and despair, in time we would remember our losses by the legacy of hope they left us, determined that together we would overcome.